By the end of this video, you'll know everything you need to know about CSS Grid, Flexbox Chuck that shit out of the window, baby. After I'm done, you won't ever use it. So the video will go something like this. I'll first of all take you through the basics of Grid. Then we'll apply all the knowledge of Grid and make this beautiful looking and responsive card. So hey, how are you doing? This is WebDev. If you're liking what I'm doing here, like it or subscribe and comment down below. Initially, what do you feel about Grid? Is it like a 2D version of Flexbox like everyone says it is, or maybe it's something completely different? Let me know. Comment section down below. Let's get started.
Now here is a simple project with HTML and CSS already linked. The style.css has a CSS reset I got from a website, which you can check in the description down below. The style sheet also has some of my own styles, which looks something like this. This whole project for you to follow along is in the description down below. Now let's start by making 3 divs with class of item and call it item 1, 2 and 3. Then in our CSS, I'll give those items a background color of color primary, then a text color of color button text, then some padding of 1 rem, and finally a border of 1 pixel solid and color of color button text as well. Now in a body tag, let's give it a padding of 1 rem. Now those items look something like this. Let's start learning Grid. Now our body tag is the container that contains these 3 items. So in our body tag, let's write display grid to declare this tag as a grid. Now if you're using my project and following along, then it looks like this, because at the top here I had my min height as 100 view height. For everyone else, no visual change. But you can see that there is a grid button next to the element declared as grid. Now let's make columns and rows. We can make columns by using grid template columns. And now you can write any type of value you like. Let's say I want 3 columns of 100 pixels each, then I write 100 pixels 3 times. Now all of these are 100 pixels each. If you want to, you can use other kinds of unit as well. For example, let's say the first column will be 10%, the second 10 rem, and the third 30 view width. And there you have it. It looks something like this. Now let's say you want the third row to still take 30 width, second to still be 10 rem, but the first to take the remaining amount of space that is available. Then you write something called auto. Now the first column takes any remaining space. And if you want all of them to take equal amount of space, write auto 3 times. And by the way, if you want to add or remove column, just add or remove a value. Now, if you want the same result of auto, but want one column to be bigger or maybe smaller than the others, then you use something called fractional unit. So let's replace these autos with 1FR. And you can see nothing changes, because here's how fractional unit works. It's basically like you took the width of your grid container, which is our body tag at the moment, and divided it up into 3 equal pieces and gave all of these columns 1 out of 3 pieces. Now let's say I want the second column to be twice as big as the others. Then I'll give it 2FR. So now you can say we divided the total width into 4 equal pieces and gave the middle one 2 out of 4 pieces. Now we can use fixed values in some of our columns and fractional unit on the others. And it does the same dividing up into equal pieces things, but with the remaining amount of space. Now you can also use things like min content, which tries to make content as small as possible. As you can see, the first column is only as big as the text inside it as well as the padding. To check that further, let's make this text bigger. As you can see, when I turn it into an H3 tag, the column gets bigger. But if I write something more, for example, because min content tries to make content as small as possible. To not have that, you can give this content a specific width like this. And because of min content, your column will be as big as that width. Now let's say you have 6 items and you want to create 6 columns. So you can either write a value 6 times or write repeat. Then inside, the value you want to have, comma, the number of times you want to repeat. Sorry, my bad. The number of times you want to repeat and the value you want to have. You can add multiple repeat values as well. Let's say if you want to have the first 3 as 100 pixels, the 4th and 5th as 2 FRs, and the last one as 1 FR. Then you write it like this. Repeat 300 pixels, then repeat 2 FRs, then a simple 1 FR. And it gets the same result. Now let's say out of these 3 columns, the first one is a sidebar and we only want it to have a width between 100 and 300 pixels. Then we can use Minmax to give it that width. So write Minmax and inside write minimum value, which is 100 pixels, comma, maximum value, which is 300 pixels. Then to see if it works, turn on inspect element, then toggle device toolbar and select the first div. And you can see the max width is 300 pixel, which is 266 plus maybe 16 and 1, which gives us a 300 pixels. It doesn't grow or shrink, but it does shrinks down, and the minimum goes to about 66 plus 16 plus 1, which is almost 100 pixels. So it has a min-max value of 300 and 100 pixels, exactly like we wanted. You can have values like min content and auto as well. Grid template rows is exactly like grid template columns, but for rows. It will also have things like auto, fractional unit, min content, repeat, and min-max. Now, if you want to write both of them like a goddamn pro, then use grid template. Just write the amount of rows you want and the amount of columns you want. And you're good to go. Now finally, we can also set the flow of our grid. Right now, it fills up a whole row, then goes to the next one and fills it up as well. But if you want it to fill up the column first, then use grid auto flow and set it up to column. Now as you can see, a column gets filled up first, then goes to the next column. It also takes in a value called dense, which will densely pack a new item that appears in the grid. Now although we have border radius to separate these grids, if we didn't, then we can use gap to have gaps between every cell. So let's add a gap of 0.5 rem, which is 8 pixels, and it looks something like this. If you want different gaps for row and column, then use row gap and column gap. And if you want to write this professionally in one single line, then you can use our good old gap. So gap, and then the row comes first, so 0.5 rem, then the column comes second, and it gives us the same effect. Now the reason why I love grid is the thing right here, the grid template areas, baby. The baby not included in the syntax. But seriously, I love grid, and I do so because of this. Layouting is so much more easier because of this, and let me show you how. So let's say you have 5 sections of content like navbar, sidebar, main to, and footer, and let's give them different classes and style those classes as well. Now below our gap, let's write grid template areas, then a string which is a single row. Now let's say you want 2 columns, then just write dot space dot. And if I hit save, now it's a 2 column setup. If you want to add another column, just add another dot. Now in our case, we want this navbar to take the whole top row, then we write navbar instead of dots. After that, we need to assign our navbar class as the navbar grid area. Now to add another row, just below our string, add another string. Let's say in this one the first column is sidebar, and then the second and third is main. Then let's assign them as well. So this is how it basically works. Now let me make our full layout. Now once everything is set up, it does work perfectly fine. But if you think about it, those navbar and footer doesn't need to be that big. And if we make the window bigger, the sidebar also doesn't need to be that big. So let's fix that with our good old grid template column and row. For the column, let's give it a 250 pixels, 1 FR and 1 FR, in which the 250 will be our sidebar. Then for the rows, let's give it a 100 pixels, 1 FR, and then finally another 100 pixels. For our navbar, main to, and footer. So now let's say you want to have different layouts for different screen size, then just fiddle around with these values. For example, write at media only screen, and inside the bracket write max width is equal to 480 pixels, which is our mobile size. Then in our body, in our grid template areas, we don't need 3 columns, just 1, so we'll write it like that. And now with grid template areas, we have only one column. So we don't need more than one column in grid template columns as well. So write grid template columns and write one FR. And finally, we don't need a sidebar in a mobile layout. So sidebar will be display none. So let's try and check it by going to inspect element. And as you can already see in mobile view, it's a one column setup. And when you go to desktop view, it gets back into its previous 3 column setup. Let me show you by doing this as well. It's a 3 column setup. When I go to mobile, it will be 1 column setup. And this is the reason why I love grid so much, just because of grid template areas. Now we will do some minor aligning stuff. I'll show you how to align stuff here, and then we'll start creating our card. Now for aligning, go to your inspect element, then click on grid next to your grid container to turn on grid. Then here you can see this open grid container. Just click on it, and these are everything you can use to align stuff in your grid container. Now the align version of this code will align stuff on the y-axis, and justify version of the same code will align stuff on the x-axis. So now let's start with align content. Now if I write align content start, then as you can see, the whole grid will move at the top of your screen. If I write center, it comes to the center, and if I write end, it goes to the end. And there are other features as well, like space between, which gives as much spacing as possible between grid cells that are above and below each other. Space around, which does the same thing but gives space around those grid cells, and space evenly, which will evenly space out everything around those grid cells. So you can do the same thing with justify as well, like justify start, it goes to the start of your x-axis, meaning the left side. Justify center, center, justify end, take it to the end. Space between gives you equal amount of spacing. Let me remove this so that it will be easier for you to see. Space around gives equal amount of space around each cell, and space evenly gives you even amount of spacing. So let's say if I want these items to be right here, which is align at the center and justify at the end, then I'll write it like this: align content center to bring them in the center, and then justify content to the end. And if I want to write this professionally, there is something called place content, P-L-A-C-E content, and you write the align first, so center, and then justify, so end. It will give you the same result. Let me just close this. Gives you the same result. Now align items and justify items will align stuff inside the grid but not the grid itself. So if I write align item start, all the individual item will go to the top of their individual cells. So just like align content, I can do align items start, center, end, and stretch, which is by default. Now similarly, justify items is also exactly the same, just for the x-axis. So justify start, center, end, and stretch, which is by default. So if I want all of them to be individually here, then I write align items center and justify items end. Then again, if I want to write it professionally, I write place item center and end, which gives you the same result. Let me close this out. Now let's say I want this last one to be here and not here. So how do I do that? Is I will just go here, and let's say this is another class, right? So I'm going to give it another class of item 2, and down here what you can do, by the way, let me just turn it back on, and let's give it a styling as well. So I'm going to give item 1 and item 2 both the same styling, item 2. Okay, so right now everything is here, but I want this one to be here. How do I do that? Is I go to item 2 and write align self to the end. For aligning, now it's in the end, as well as for right now justify self to the end as well. Or maybe if I want it in the center, I can write center. And if I have to write it professionally, place self to the end and center.
So now this is all the things you need to know about grid. There are more stuff you may want to know, and if you want to know and get better at it, then I'll give you some links and games from which I learned grid. Hope they are helpful. With that said, let's make our own responsive card. So now let's create our card using grid. In our HTML, make a div with a class card and grid card. This card is a pre-made class I have, and this grid card is where we will put our grid styling. Now inside this card, let's have an image with a class of image. In the src, write dot slash, then select image and portfolio image. Then below that image, we need a title, so an h3 with a class called title. And inside write portfolio website. Then span with class of date and text title. This text title is also another class I made, and this date is to know when this project was made. So inside write something like November 2022. Now let's have a small description of this project by having a paragraph tag with a class of description. And inside let's have a simple lorem text. Then let's have a made with section. This is a section in which you show what language do you use or what software you use to build this portfolio website project. So let's have a div with a class of made with, and inside have a div with a class of made with title and text title. Then let's write made with. After that, I will add 3 more divs with a class of made with content. Here I'll add those languages or softwares. So in my case, I'm going to add HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And finally, below this made with div, have a button with a class of demo button, and then write demo. So the final card looks something like this. Now let's start styling it. So first, in our style sheet, write body and declare it as display grid. Then write place items center and give a padding of 1 rem, so that when we start styling our card, it will stay at the center of the screen. After that, in our grid card class, declare this as display grid, then give it a gap of 1 rem. Then let's lay it out like this. Our first row will be image, title, date. Then the second, image, description, and description. Then the third will have image, made with, and demo button. Now let's give all these classes their respective grid area. So first of all, our image will get in grid area of image. And similarly, let's do that with all of our other classes as well. Now everything is exactly where it should be. So let's adjust column size with grid template columns. The image should be a min-max of auto and 400 pixels. The second one for now will just be auto, and the third will be a min content, because these two in this third column don't need a fixed width. Now once I have saved this, and if I make this screen a bit larger, we realize that the paragraph keeps on growing. So to limit it, we'll give the middle column a min-max of auto and 360 pixels. Much better. Now finally, let's style up, fix, and align each and every items in this card, starting with our image. So first of all, I'll give it a border radius by just copying a border radius here from our card. Just put that, it'll give it some styling. Then either you can write height is equal to 100%, or exactly like this, I can write align self stretched. Both will give the same result, but this is a grid video, baby, so use align self. Now you can see the image looks a bit stretched, and to fix that, we need to set object fit to cover. Now it looks slightly cropped rather than stretched, which is way better. Now after that, let's turn on grid, because we'll need to align some stuff. Now our title looks fine, but the date needs to be at the center and end. So let's write place self center end. Much better. Then the description looks fine, and the made with needs styling, but I'll come back to that
after I align the bottom at the end. Now let's align the made with at the end and declare it as grid. And click on the grid button next to it. Now let's start by giving it a gap of 0.5 rem. And I'm going to close the grid of this card so that it's easier to understand and see. Alright, then set grid template areas as made with title for time. And set our made with title with the grid area of made with title. So this basically means that every row will have 4 columns, and the first row will be taken entirely by our made with title, and it works perfectly fine. Now let's justify the made with title to the center and start working on styling our made with content. So I'm going to close this grid as well, the grid at the bottom, I guess, this grid as well. So now we'll start styling our. Before we do that, if you can see here, I made it a 4-column setup because maybe if we add something, it will go to this column, right? It's not like you will always have 3 items, you might have 4 items, and I made that, but now it's not centered. So what do we need to do? Just go here and write grid auto columns. This will automatically size every column at once, and there's a row version of it as well, by the way. So grid auto columns and just write min content. The moment we do that, all of them get squeezed up properly. Now let's start styling these content. So first of all, I'm going to give it a background color of var and dash color dash input field. So it's an input field color, a bit of lightish blue. Let me remove this to show you. Yep, lightish blue. Then I'm going to first of all give it a padding on the left and right, which is called padding inline, of 1 rem. Then padding block, which is a padding of top and bottom of 0.5 rem. Now to give it a pill shape, I'm going to give it a border radius of 999 pixels, as big as you can, which will give it a pill shape. Then I want these text to be actually capitalized, so I'll write text transform uppercase. Then I'll have the text be a little bit more smaller, so font size of 12 pixels. Then I'll make it bold, so font width of 700, which is our bold font, and voila, that is exactly how I wanted it. So after doing all of that, here you have it, a beautiful looking card that looks great in 4K screens, in bigger laptops, in a bit of smaller laptops, but when you take it to tablet, it still looks fine, but when you take it to smaller tablet, it looks ugh. So let's fix that. Now write at media only screen and max width of 768 pixels. Then let's change the layout in grid card class by changing the grid template area into a 2-column setup, which goes something like this. After we hit save, you'll see a bit of gap here. That is the 3rd column. And the reason why is because up here, we have it as a 3-column setup. So since we have made it into a 2-column one, we need to fix it up like this. After that is done, I want these items to be centered. So I'll write justify items center. Now all of them don't go to the center because some of them were aligned individually. So let's fix that in tablet mode. So to do that, all we need to do is the date has to be justified center, then our title justify center, as well as text align center. We will need this text align center in smaller sizes. Then our description is actually justified center, but the text align is not centered. So let's fix that by using text align center. Then I want this demo button to be stretched. So write demo button. Then justify self as stretched. Now nothing happens and it just goes to the side because up here when I made this button, I had it at a fixed width. So just to fix that problem, all I need to do is down here, write width is auto. So in tablet mode, width will be auto and it will look something like this. So now it looks beautiful in tablet mode, but not in mobile mode. So let's fix that by having a media query of that size. Then let's change the grid layout in grid card by writing. So grid template area, our first row will be image because now we will only have a one row system. So title, second row, third row is date, fourth is description, fifth is made with, and the final one is our demo button. Hit save and again we have an extra column. Let's fix that. And now it looks relatively really great. Now I want padding to be a little bit less. In our card, where is it? At the top, I had it at 20 pixels. I want it at like 16 pixels, so 1 rem. So I'm just gonna write padding of 1 rem. Much better. Now finally, a personal design choice. Let's remove this made with title because the card will still be quite understandable even if you don't have it. So I'm gonna remove it by having made with title as display none. Still readable and looks quite beautiful. So there you have it, a simple, beautiful and quite responsive card made almost entirely with grid. So final thoughts, although it might look and feel easy as you are following along, it is quite hard when you try to make something on your own because there's always a voice in the back of your head trying to take you back into Flexbox. Use Flexbox. It is so easy. Just use it, you son of a bitch. Why you make your life so hard? So, I would recommend give it a try. Still give it a try, and I can assure you your HTMLs will start looking a lot more cleaner and your CSS quite easy to comprehend. So, what are your final thoughts? Is it actually like a 2D version of Grid or something quite special? Let me know in the comment section down below and have a wonderful day. Bye bye.